Welcome to the Mental Mastery for Leaders Breakfast. If you enjoy these videos, do not forget to subscribe and also feel free to write any comments. I'm always happy to read them, or any questions, I'm happy to answer to them. Today we will talk about Melanie, who was the country managing director of a cosmetics company. And the question was, is she too tough or too soft? Actually, most people at that point, 10 months into her role, believed that Melanie was too tough. In fact, there were even two whistleblower complaints, which said things like she's selfish, she's harsh, she doesn't listen, she doesn't act in the best interest of the company, and things like that. So when I met Melanie for the chemistry check meeting, where we tried to figure out if I should be her coach, she mentioned to me that she's really surprised. In fact, the company did actually a formal 360-degree feedback, where they collected feedback from peers, from direct reports, from superiors, even from other people, to see, is this feedback consistent? That was actually a consequence of the whistleblower complaints, or are these just a few exceptions? Now, the feedback was actually mostly consistent. About 70-80% of the people who were asked gave similar feedback, whereas about 20-30% gave actually much more positive feedback. So when I talked to Melanie about all that, she said, I'm really surprised. I'm happy that at least some people saw that I'm not that monster that some people make me out to be. But it's quite tough for me to take, especially to be called selfish, me and selfish. Nobody ever said that to me before. And she also shared that she was quite stressed in the first 10 months. I mean, the results overall were quite positive, but still it came at a high personal cost. She felt often tired and exhausted, but she told that only to me, nobody else. So when we went through her assessment, it was actually really interesting. In fact, I kind of expected that to happen. Feedback, she is harsh, she is selfish, she doesn't listen. And what was the feedback from the assessment, not the 360, but the psychometric assessment, Harrison assessments, actually just the opposite. She was seen as self-sacrificing, opposite of selfish. She was seen as permissive, opposite of harsh. And she was seen as super open, opposite of not listening. How do we make sense of that? Well, one of the things Harrison found is that when we have these strong imbalances between so-called paradoxical traits, for example, how I achieve results through other people, that's depending on how much I care for people and how much I enforce the results, meaning how much I hold people accountable. And ideally, we do both. Ideally, we've built close, trusted relationships so that people are naturally engaged because they feel emotional commitment. At the same time, we also hold them accountable if they don't deliver as agreed or expected. Whereas in her case, she was actually just the opposite. She was very strong in close warmth and empathy, being close to people, and very weak in enforcing, holding people accountable as her main tendency. But that's not what people saw. What did people see is a so-called emotional flip. Harrison found that if the two traits that are paradoxical are not in balance, means one is significantly stronger than the other, then we tend to flip under certain emotions to the opposite behavior. These are usually emotions like anger, frustration, stress, things like that, that kind of take you down a bit. And then we tend to flip to the opposite behavior. And in her case, that would mean to flip from permissive to harsh, or from self-sacrificing to selfish, or from very open and willingness to hear to very dogmatic, close-minded, not listening. Now, the triggers for these flips are emotions. So our ability to manage our emotions and our situation that maybe create less or more stress on us has a big impact on whether we flip frequently or rarely. Now, in Melanie's case, remember, she said she was quite exhausted, quite tired, quite stressed for most of these 10 months since she joined, meaning she would get quite easily triggered to flip to the opposite side because her emotional self-management, which we also measured, was actually quite weak. We see stress management rather than emotional self-management, but it's a great indicator of how much we are able to manage our emotions. If our stress management is really great, we tend to be good at managing emotions in general, and vice versa. So her stress management was poor. There was a lot of pressure from others and herself. And as a result, she would flip quite often. So that's actually quite interesting. And moreover, you have to imagine that the flips from the side where she was, which is actually a gentle, nice side, to the other side, which is aggressive, like harsh, selfish, dogmatic, is that the flip is much more visible than the gentle behavior. If I'm self-sacrificing, yeah, over time you notice, but if I'm selfish, you notice right away. If I'm permissive, let people too easily off the hook, you notice over time, but if I'm harsh, you notice right away. So because these flips are much more visible, it started to create the impression in other people that that's how she is as a main tendency, which was actually not the case. It was flip behaviors was not her main tendency. And that was kind of good news because she didn't have to learn to be nicer. Actually, she had to learn to be tougher, but in a controlled way, not in a emotional flip way. And tougher doesn't mean nasty. So, for example, I can be tough, but not harsh. Yeah, Harrison calls that compassionate enforcing. I can be very open and very certain. Harrison calls that truth exploring. I can be very helpful and still taking care of my own needs. That Harrison calls that mutual help. And so the good news is we needed to keep her gentle traits at a high level while increasing the weaker dynamic traits so that she would get more into a balance, because once you are more in a balance of these traits, you actually don't flip anymore under emotions. Your behavior becomes more consistent. Moreover, and that was probably more urgent, I had to work with her on her emotional self-management, because if she can better manage her emotions, then she won't flip that much anymore, right? And so that was kind of the short-term goal, get her emotional self-management to the level where she minimizes flips so that these behaviors that people complained about would essentially stop or at least reduce very significantly. And that was luckily achieved fairly quickly. After a few sessions, we made some significant progress on that. But I felt there was something more fundamental still below, and that was actually her self-esteem. Her self-esteem was unfortunately not in balance, was not strong. She was actually quite self-critical. And so her self-acceptance was not at the level where it should be, whereas her self-improvement was very high. But also to the outside world, she would often show up as overconfident because she's trying to hide that part. So I felt we should address that as well. And I have developed a specific approach to help people improve their self-acceptance in a relatively short time. In the best cases, we have achieved that in one session. In other cases, most other cases, it took about 3-4 reinforcement sessions until the self-esteem was at a sufficiently high level. So you see, what you see is not always what there is. Of course, it is in a way because these flip behaviors do exist. They are not made up. at the same time, we often don't see that this is just an emotional flip behavior, not the true behavior that they normally display. And that's why Melanie said to me at the beginning, in my previous company, nobody ever gave me feedback like that. They thought I'm a very nice person. I'm a very easy to work with person. I never got feedback like this. So it was really shocking to me. And you see, it all makes sense. Once we understand how these emotional flips work, it all suddenly makes sense. So you see, in this case, we also address the first aspect of mental mastery, a healthy self-esteem, as well as the second aspect of mental mastery, that is about being able to manage our emotions while maintaining a high degree of self-motivation. If you found this session useful, this episode, then please subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, please write into the comment section. And I look forward to see you again for my next Mental Mastery for Leaders breakfast coming up soon.